Right. Okay. So it looks like my mic is going. Hopeful that you can hear what I'm saying.
Nate, this is
Yeah,
Kaylin. Can you get closer to your microphone or turn it up a little bit?
Yeah. You know what? I think it's going through my laptop microphone right now. Hold on. Let's see if we can get this little thing.
I think you're set. I can hear you really good now.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, we will.
Let's see. We're just plugging in a microphone right now. Okay, can you hear me okay now?
Yes.
Okay, good. That looks like it's coming through the headphone. Okay, well, we apologize that we got a late start here. We had some technical difficulties, but I think we are okay now. So this is our fourth session of motivational interviewing, and as you can see, today is going to be about increasing client motivation. Kind of a sum up of everything we've done previously, but we're also going to be talking about supporting self-efficacy, improving readiness to change, developing change plans with our clients, so how do we actually make a plan, and then how to give advice, and a couple other tools and stuff, and then we'll just kind of wrap everything up. Now, I apologize last time for our little video. It didn't work, and I know probably some of you are feeling that you're dying of PowerPoint overload right now. We thought we had that video working last week, but at least we had the audio, which is the most important thing. So today we've got no videos, so I promise everything will work, and hopefully we don't kill too much of your brain off with one more PowerPoint again. So let's just kind of review what we talked about in our last session. So in our last session, first we talked about open-ended questions versus those closed-ended questions, and hopefully you got the opportunity to try some of those out. And again, if you remember, those open-ended questions are questions where your client has the opportunity to respond. They're not going to just fire back with a yes or no answer kind of thing. And then those closed questions, we certainly have to ask some of those sometimes. That'll be like filling out some, the forms we have and that kind of thing. But we always want to try to do the open-ended questions if we can. That's going to be our best bet to get more change talk from them, more forward momentum language. Now that second thing we talked about was how to affirm our clients, give them those positive affirmations. So we talked about different ways to do that and build that confidence in them and look at their past successes. And that big thing there, we want to compliment on real things. So even if you're working with a client through their diet and their exercise plan, any small changes you see them do, we want to make sure that we compliment them on that we, give them some positive reinforcement about those things that they were able to do. Now the reflect, that was going back to some of those tools we learned in our second session where we talked about our simple reflection, our complex reflection. And again, so when we're working with our clients, we want to be using those reflections a lot to get them to give us that change talk. And that final thing we talked about, those OARS skill.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Now, we just got a message from the online thing, so hopefully you can all hear me. So again, our summarized part, we talk about linking together relevant points. So we, help our clients figure everything they've said and tie it up into kind of, one single point there. So that's, again, a way for us to summarize the things we've done and gone over. So our next thing here is, we talked about confidence. That was the last piece that we covered, which, again, today we're going to go over kind of some things that go along with this. But, again, just confidence is a quick reminder. It's that self-assurance or belief in your ability to succeed, or in other words, how inclined they are to try something. Again, the example I gave is, with somebody who's trying to quit smoking, you could do the same thing with a diet. If they've tried to lose weight and 5 times before they weren't successful, they're going to be a little less likely to try number 6, just because they failed all those times before. So we have to really work on building our clients' confidence that they can actually make the change. And that's going to be with reminding them of their past successes, talking about the good things they've done, just bring them back to that strength and kind of empowering part of things. So here's a nice little demotivation thing I put in there. Say no, overconfidence. Before you attempt to beat the odds, be sure you can survive the odds beating you. You have a little skier with a guy behind there. I guess that goes to that saying where you say, I don't have to run really fast, just faster than you. Funny moment for a second. Now, resistance tools, just as a quick reminder, and hopefully you got a chance to practice some of these. But again, we've got that stop, drop, and roll concept of remembering when you start to see resistance in your clients, you're making sure that, you don't charge right into that, that you back off and, again, use some of these tools we talked about. That simple and complex, we've gone over those twice now. Again, that simple reflection is just reflecting back in a very simple way, almost word for word, exactly what you heard your clients say. And then that complex reflection, that's a little bit deeper, where you are not only responding back, but you're trying to put some meaning to what your client's saying. So the good thing of that is if you get it right, your client's going to feel really heard. They're going to feel really understood. And if you get it wrong, it might kind of cause a little hiccup, but usually won't cause too much damage. They may just have to repeat back what they're really meaning. That amplified reflection, if you remember, that's kind of the sarcastic, response where we're jumping on the side of the resistance, maybe agreeing with their resistance in the hope that they're going to jump on the other side of the teeter-totter there and fight for the good side. Then that double-sided reflection, again, that's where we're honoring the ambivalence, shifting focus, and we'll talk about shifting focus a little later today again, because it combines up well with some of the other tools when we're actually giving advice and when we're moving into a change plan with people. That asking for permission, again, we'll also talk about that again, because again, in the advice giving portion of things, combining up a shift focus with an ask permission can work really well. And then that last resistance tool we talked about was emphasizing personal choice and freedom. So again, just letting them know that it really is their choice whether they change or not. So let's dive right into this change talk concept. Now, as we develop discrepancy between the client's goals and their behavior, we're going to begin to elicit what's called change talk. Again, I've referred to this before, but change talk, it stretches the distance between the status quo talk, so basically that language we get that's not moving forward, and our clients' goals, their priorities, their values, the things they want to accomplish. And now the idea behind change talk is that we hear us say something, or we take a position, and then we tend to become more attached to the idea as we say it. So we want to get them doing this all the time. It's as if we say, hey, I just said that smoking is hurting my health. It's costing me money and having a negative impact on my family. And if I said that, it's not some doctor, or not some pushy social worker, healthcare professional, or whatever, I must believe it. Because again, we want to believe what we say. So we want to get them talking about this. The more, the better. Now, three things we do with change talk is first we have to recognize it, so we have to get good at knowing when they're giving us change talk. And this kind of goes back to one of those very first skills we talked about, which is that darn CT mnemonic, recognizing the desire, recognizing their abilities, all those things, their reasons, their needs, commitment language, taking steps. We want to make sure we're seeing all of that. Now, evoking it, we want to mine it, meaning when they start giving us change talk, we want to get more of it. And a good way to do that is start asking those how questions. Or I'm sorry, those why questions. Is why? Why do you want to change your diet up? Why do you want to get your family off your back? Or why do you want to make your doctor happy? Or, whatever it is. But again, we want to explore that, mine it, and get more of that change talk. Now, the last thing is we want to reinforce it by getting greedy. Again, so once we start bringing it out, we want to get them saying it, so them talking about the change talk. Now, let's go to the specific strategies, and these will be kind of the tools that we're going to learn today that we can use. Now, we've talked about what change talk is, so again, keep that in your mind. And how it functions. So let's go specifically into how you can evoke it. So this was kind of the second step on there. We've talked about recognizing it in previous things. We want change talk for two reasons. First, because it increases your client's motivation, which again is what this is all about. And then second, because we can reinforce it in order to strengthen the client's motivation. Now, if your client's not volunteering a lot of change talk, we need to actively mine it. Delve into it. So remember, motivational interviewing would not support us lecturing to clients about the reasons change is needed. Rather, it's going to tell our clients why they should be arguing for the change. So our role is often put in a we're going to throw the dots out so our clients can connect all those dots. I'm going to talk about that more, I think, on our next slide. So even though it's easier to just tell a client what we're thinking about the reasons they need a change, there's a lot more advantage if they're arguing for that themselves. And so sometimes we have to resist that. So again, we're going to go specifically in these different things. So kind of like I said, you've got to sometimes resist that urge to tell them what to do, and that putting the dots out there, that can be a really powerful thing. Where you bring together a whole bunch of points. Now, last night I was doing a session with somebody, and it was a teenage girl, and she's having problems with her mom. Not a big surprise, relationship problems. And at the heart of this was her sneaking out, with a boyfriend a couple weeks ago, and so she wasn't really recognizing that. And so I kind of helped her get to that point by asking a bunch of those why questions. Well, why do you think your mom doesn't trust you? Why do you think she put this curfew on you? Why do you think she took your phone away? And once she had put all those dots out there, then I restated those, and then I said, well, what do you think all that means? Oh, well, I think that means my mom's hurt, that she can't trust me, and that I did this and she was worried for me. Great, we were able to go from there. Again, so you want to try to put those dots out there so your client can make the connection. So it's not you. Because again, you're probably going to be able to figure it out pretty quick, but it's much more powerful if they're the ones figuring that out rather than us. So this first tool we're going to talk about is the importance ruler. Now, this importance ruler, it also kind of goes back to our person-centered nature of this. It's all about them, and it's a great tool to kind of bring out the discrepancy, like I kind of referred to before, that discrepancy between behavior and goals. So again, this is something that you can start trying to do today. It's an easy tool to use. So the way that I do it, like it says there, is you want to focus on whatever behavior you want to change, whether it's diet, whether it's exercise, whether it's a particular behavior that's bad. Then you're going to ask a scaling question with numbers, and I'll give you kind of an example here in a second. And again, it doesn't really matter which number you get. So an example, somebody I did just recently, I had somebody trying to quit alcohol. They're an alcoholic, and I just said, okay, so you've told me you want to quit alcohol. So tell me on a scale between 1 and 10, how confident are you that you can quit? 10 being you're absolutely confident, you're devoted to this change, 1 being you're not confident at all. And the client, he kind of sat there for a second and said, well, I'm here talking to you, and things have been kind of falling apart in my life, so I think I'm probably about an 8. I said, oh, interesting. Well, that's great that it's an 8. Why isn't it like a 7? Why isn't it lower? Now again, sometimes this will surprise people because I think a lot of times, a lot of our clients are used to these scaling questions. But typically we don't ask, why it isn't lower. We always ask why it isn't higher. The problem with that is when we ask why it's higher, a lot of times we're going to give a status quo talk. So when I asked this client, he kind of looked at me for a second because he was expecting it to be the higher question and said, well, it's not lower because, oh, my wife has threatened to leave me, and, it's costing me a ton of money, and, I got suspended from my job the other day, and I don't know if they're going to let me come back. And, it's starting to affect my health, and my dad was an alcoholic, and he was pretty mean drunk, and I don't want to turn into that. Again, he gave me a whole bunch of great change talk. So again, like it says there, is that first step is pick the behavior, whatever the behavior is, then ask that scaling question, and you can do scales 0 to 10. I like to do 1 to 10 because then it forces them to at least put some kind of motivation on there. And then again, it doesn't matter what number they give you, and I would do it just like I've got in that slide, is just say, huh, interesting. Why isn't it lower? Again, it doesn't matter what number they give you, and even if they say 2 numbers, always just go with whatever a lower number is. And then listen for that change talk and get really greedy. Keep asking those why questions. And then after they're done, do a quick summary of what you've heard. From there, this is going to give you a great launch off point, because once you've summarized all the change talk they gave you, then you can kind of go back into that how, which again is kind of the burning thing that we're all waiting to do, is tell them how to do it. But this can be a really good way to get to that point, because what you're going to do is you're going to build their motivation to change, and You're going to have them acknowledge that they want to change, and they're going to be more open to listening to you and the suggestions you have about that. So again, like it says there, how important is changing blank, whatever the behavior is at this time in your life. Get that answer from them, and then follow up. Some follow-up questions that I kind of wrote into this. That first one, I'm curious about why it's this high. Why isn't it lower? Again, and that lower question, that's the key. You always got to ask the why isn't it lower, because we want to get that change talk, not the status quo talk. One thing sometimes people ask me when I do these trainings is, well, what if they say 0? What if they say it's nothing at all? The thing I've done when they give you that 0 question is say, well, think about a time in your life when it wasn't 0. What was that number? Almost always they'll give you a number. Oh, it was maybe a 5, 4 months ago. And they just go right into it. Well, why wasn't it a 4 at that time? And again, you'll get that change talk still. I think every once in a while you get a client who just says, oh, it's 0, and that's that. And so sometimes I just say, okay, well, let's pretend that it was, a 4 on there. And sometimes they'll start, well, we'll go with a 6. Oh, okay, great. Now you've already got them into that looking at change talk thing. Now, later on, you can change into that of, has there been times when this has been higher? It's not a horrible thing to do, but I always, again, try to go with that lower question, and I've just seen it work a little bit better there. Again, you got to make sure you listen carefully for the change talk they give you once you answer that, and then get greedy, meaning keep asking more about it, keep summarizing, keep trying to put the dots out there, because this is where we really want to build that motivation in them so we can switch over to the how and start making some progress on things. So, after you've done that ruler, summarize your change talk that you got up, and you might even want to write this down, because again, if you've done this right, you're going to get a lot of great change talk from it. And it might be things that you need to go back and explore, because this will also give you good information that you can add into whatever change plan you're going to do with them. Now again, at the end of this, it's a great place to transition into how, but again, I would always do that ask for permission. Ask them if they'd like your advice on how to deal with that problem. And then that's where you can, once they say yes, then that's when you can really dive into, oh yeah, okay, do this, try this out, and again, give them a lot better advice that way. So let's move on to our next tool, our next thing to do, which is, mining change talk by using evocative open-ended questions. So again, keep in your mind what those open-ended questions are, and again, this is another way to get change talk. And to do this, you're going to ask the client questions that will bring up change talk. Now, you can use that darn CT topic, mnemonic that we used in the past, the desire, ability, reason, need, as those should have given you really good topics and a great place to start at. But, some of the examples I put there is, what are the problems with not having a home? Again, if somebody's losing their home, and again, when we say evocative questions, we want to talk about important things to them. Some of the examples, the other ones I put on here is, for you, what problems come from using drugs? Or how has whatever behavior affected you and your family? Go into maybe the specific health concerns. And again, if you're talking about a diet, it could be, how has this affected your relationship? How has this affected your self-confidence? Any of those deep things, and they're going to give you some good, probably powerful change talk. Now the flip side of that, on one side we talk about the disadvantages. On the other side, you can also talk about the advantages of change. If you were to change, what would be better? Again, this is going into their hope of things. How would your life be better if you use less? What do you hope will be different by changing? Again, explore with them what they want their life to look like, in the positive. But again, we're going to go to both sides of that. Now, a little different twist on that is talking about their optimism to change. Now, asking questions about optimism, this can help your client feel more confident, going back to that confident piece from our last webinar. They're going to feel more confident in their change and in their ability to get the skills needed to change. Having a few backup questions to elicit confidence can be really helpful. So maybe an example might be, tell me of a change you've successfully made in your life. Again, we're going back to what they do well. What are your strengths that can help you change? Most people like to brag about themselves a little bit, so this is a good chance to get them doing that. Or maybe, how did you accomplish, some positive goal or achievement recently? Again, anything that's going to build confidence in them and encourage them to be more optimistic about things. Second piece is intention to change, and if you think back to our CT mnemonic, this goes back to our commitment steps. So, asking things like, what's next for you? What plans do you have for making change? If you were to change, what is the first thing you would do? Again, that last question, that's giving you a good place to start with those how questions. And hopefully you can see this we're building up to creating a very specific change plan for somebody this way. So again, that's how we use this evocative open-ended questions. Now, the third tool on here is this decisional balance. Now, I've literally taken this little graph that you see on your screen right now, and I put that down, in this little box, and I title the boxes again: advantages of change, advantages of status quo, disadvantages of change, disadvantages of status quo. And then I have them answer these questions, and I write things in those little boxes. This is especially helps people that are visual learners. They can see their responses written. Sometimes it can have more of an impact than just hearing themselves say it. So this is a lot of times after I fill this out with a client, I'll have them take it home and put it on their refrigerator, just so that they can see before their eyes the things they actually said about this. So again, that's a good one to do, and just the best way is just write, draw that little graph there and do that with them. Now, the fourth piece here is setting, helping them highlight their goals and their values. And these can be really powerful things. This might go back to the needs that people have, that very internal, combination of emotions and reasoning. So their heart and their head. What is it that is really, really important for them? So, on that first question, what goals are you working on? I'd always encourage you to work with them in figuring out small little goals they can do at first to get to whatever their big goal is. So just, maybe some examples would be, things like, what do you hope to have accomplished by next week? Again, don't talk about a month, but just talk about a week at a time, or even a day if you need to. Or what do you want for your family? Again, just talk about the little goals they have. When we do that, when we set little achievable goals, the long-term goals don't feel so overwhelming. So if you've got somebody who you're really trying to work on their diet or their weight or a particular health concern that it's going to take consistency in a long time, that's where you want to build these little goals in, because if people are just focused on that big long-term goal, a lot of times it feels overwhelming. They get discouraged because they don't think they can reach it or get there. The next thing, what matters most to you, or going into, the priorities, the thing we need to remember is we got to make it about their priorities, not ours, because again, our clients are going to have different priorities in life than we do, and motivational interviewing tells us we've got to acknowledge that and respect that. So a couple examples of maybe questions you could ask on that would be, of the things we've discussed, what's your highest priority? Ask them straight up. What do they want most? Another question you could do is, what is next for you? Again, what kind of, what do they see happening next? That's going to give you maybe your first thing to work on. But again, explore those priorities with it. Final thing, the values. So like it says, what do you value most in life? What do you value about your family? Again, we're talking about kind of those core self-esteem issues for them. I think when they just asked the other day is, what do you value about your role as a father? That really got a lot of change talk from this guy. Again, talking about things that are most important to people. Because anytime we're doing that, now we're mining that change talk, we're getting very powerful things out. They're going to help lead right into actually making some changes, which is, again, is our end goal. So exploring extremes. This is, it's just another strategy for evoking change talk. And we use these questions to explore kind of both ends of the spectrum. So like it says there, what was the best thing about, again, whatever this behavior is, or what was the worst thing? Just some examples I just jotted down is, one might be, for you, what is the best thing about being sober? Or what is the worst thing about being pulled over for speeding? Or what excites you most about losing the weight that getting to your target weight? What would be the best thing that could come from attending a parenting course, a training course? Or, what was the worst part of finding out that you had cancer, that you had serious health problems? What's the best thing about, losing a few pounds or being, having your doctor tell you you're improving? Again, any of those things, when we explore the best and worst, what we kind of do is we address a specific thinking error that people have. I mean, people like to do what we call catastrophizing. They like to, either make things out to be really big, a really big deal, and it's the end of the world, or they kind of minimize things. Oh, it's not that big of a deal, and exploring these extremes can kind of help you tease those out and then talk about them. Because again, people are great about minimizing their own bad behavior or their own poor choices, or even exaggerating maybe small things that really aren't that big of a deal, but because they don't want to admit that they didn't follow through on their change plan, or don't want to admit that they are struggling with something, they might try to really get you to buy into maybe a small little detail by exaggerating it. So again, asking these kind of questions is going to help us pull that out and help that client be honest about where they're at. So we're going to kind of switch gears here to our next section there, which again is developing discrepancy. So keep those things in your mind that we just talked about, those ways to evoke change talk or to get more change talk, as we get into this next section here. So again, think your focus is on the motivation piece here. And again, motivation is going to vary over time. Some is better than others. Some, right after maybe a particularly troublesome or bad bit of news somebody got from a doctor about their health, that might be a great time to intervene with them. Or, kind of like it says on that slide, my motivation to eat right is stronger in the morning than in the evening. Okay, so let's acknowledge that. Let's look at that and see how we can use that. And again, we want to think about the situations because sometimes some situations are going to support change better than others. Just like, if they're in a meeting with a doctor and the doctor's giving them some pretty bad health news and they're pretty upset about it, sometimes that's actually a good time to intervene with them. Obviously once they've calmed down a little bit, but, they feel like they're in a time of crisis. And crisis time is actually a really good time to intervene with people because typically people are much more open to change then. So again, think about the situation and try to either create situations or help the client put themselves in situations where they're more likely to change. Because again, we're building, we're all about building the discrepancy between behaviors and actions. And again, that crisis time is going to help build that. Now, like I say, ambivalence is something we've got to address. And if we think back to those stages of change we talked about, I think in the very first webinar, and where we're looking at, contemplation or pre-contemplation, what stage they're in, typically if ambivalence is going to be very prevalent in that pre-contemplation and contemplation stages, even in the planning stage a fair amount as well. Now we've got to recognize that ambivalence is normal whenever anybody's considering change. We weigh cost-benefit. And like it says there, ambivalence about change simply means that a client recognizes their positives and negatives for trying to do something, to try to live differently or do whatever. In any real major choice in life is going to have this. Now, you can probably think about any kind of change you've tried to make and notice your own ambivalence. I know this year I've been on this exercise kick for the last few months, and there's some weeks where I think, I've got all this work to do. I could be seeing some extra clients, making some extra money, or I could go to the gym or go ride my bike. There's this ambivalence. There's this, I want to be more healthy, but at the same time, do I want to put all these other things on the back burner? And probably each one of us could probably has some similar things that are going on. So that ambivalence is tough. So here's my nice demotivation slide for this. This is indifference. It takes 43 muscles to frown and 17 to smile, but it doesn't take any to just sit there with a dumb look on your face. I love that. Again, laziness is probably in all of us and something we've all got to fight. So let's talk now about increasing that intrinsic motivation. And again, just as a, as a side note, you got to think intrinsic is going to be internal motivation. That's the best kind of motivation we've got. So that, first off, we've got to recognize that extrinsic, so the external motivation. Now, a lot of times we do a lot of those first things to people. Coerce our clients into treatment. Either it's a spouse pushing somebody, a family member, an employer even, a doctor, a probation officer, whoever. A lot of times we tell clients, okay, you either do this or X is going to happen, going back to that consequence kind of thing. And while certainly that can motivate some people and push some people, ultimately it's not the best motivator. It's not the thing that's going to keep people invested in change long term. Now, these strategies to increase intrinsic motivation, we've got to help them, first off, develop a discrepancy between where they're at and where they want to be, so that they're verbalizing what it is they want. So they're the ones talking about the change talk. Again, and there's our little thing to remind us, we've got to recognize that change talk, we've got to mine it, then we get greedy about it. Because again, we want their desire to go up. We want them, and sometimes people just have to get really uncomfortable, or even, there's got to be, things have got to be painful in their life for them to get to that point to change. Because again, going back to our little indifference slide of our cheetah sitting up there, it's easy to just sit and not move forward. And again, usually people aren't going to start thinking of a change until they start feeling that that push. They start feeling a little bit of that. So you probably remember some of these. We're going to do a little example here of, again, something a client says, and let's think about or look for places where we can get them talking about internal motivation, that intrinsic versus the external. Because again, that external is going to be focused around the status quo talk. So just like it says there, I'm so sick of my doctor telling me my health is getting worse. I just want to eat in a way that is healthy and makes me feel good. I made a mistake, but I'm doing better, and I don't need you to tell me what to do. So again, as we think about that, we want to first off identify all that change language, which is the I'm so sick of my doctor telling me my health is getting worse. Okay, so again, our internal motivation may be I don't like the fact that my doctor's upset with me, or I don't like the fact that I'm letting myself down. It's really what that comes to. I just want to eat in a way that is healthy and makes me feel good. Again, that's an internal motivation there is, okay, you want to just be able to relax about your eating, not be so worried and concerned about it. Again, a great internal thing. It would be great to ask them some of those why questions there. I made a mistake, but I'm doing better. That right there is kind of your client acknowledging that, hey, I didn't fall through on everything I wanted to do. I kind of screwed up a little bit, but I'm back on the horse. So you've got some positive talk because, I'm doing better. They're not doing the victim stance. They're not giving up. But it's at the same time they're taking responsibility for the fact that, hey, this didn't go exactly the way I wanted it to. Again, that last thing, I don't need you to tell me what to do. Again, we want to avoid that little piece at all costs. Again, that's going to be our status quo. That's talk. That's our resistance talk. That's going to get us in that tug-of-war with our client. So let's do one more of these. So again, your client says to you, well, some people think I drink too much, and I may be damaging my liver, but I still don't believe I'm an alcoholic or need to cut back. So again, we want to think about, okay, where's our internal motivation versus our external? Probably got a little bit of both here. So again, that first part, well, some people think I drink too much. Again, no, that may not. It's probably some pressure. That's some external motivation, but it's still an okay thing for us to plug into and just ask, well, why? And it may be damaging my liver. Now, that right there might be an internal thing. Well, what does that mean for you? What's that like? And again, this might go to the painful part of things or the upsetting part of things. It's the long-term goal. I don't want to have a liver transplant. I don't want to have surgery. I want to be healthy. Again, you'll probably get some very good intrinsic motivation from that piece. That second part, but I still don't believe I'm an alcoholic. I need to cut back. Again, that's all that status quo talk. That's that resistance talk. That's what we want to avoid. We want to get away from that because that's going to, again, get us into that tug of war. So you can just look at this little graph. When we're developing discrepancy, in this diagram, the client's not likely to have too much motivation to do something different because there's pretty close agreement between the client's current behavior and their values, priorities, and goals. What we really want to do is get more distance between that, because the greater the distance between a person's goals and their current behavior, their motivation is going to improve. So if you consider like a rubber band, the more it's stretched, the more power it has. When it's just limp right there, it's not too much chance to move it. Again, here's another one of my little demotivation things, saying achievement. You can do anything you set your mind to when you have vision, determination, and an endless supply of expendable labor. Yeah, you think about these ancient pharaohs, they didn't have, their priority wasn't to treat the workers well, because with the current behavior, the workers did what they want, the pyramids got built, a few slaves died, they just got more. So what we really want is exactly what we've got there, is we want, we want our clients to look like this, because this client is likely to experience more motivation to change. So if you consider this really, here's a simple example. So if Jane values being warm, but happens to be very cold, she'll be highly motivated to get warm by turning up the heat, probably putting an extra layer of clothes on or moving to another location in her house. Now, in contrast, Jane's unlikely to change her behavior if she's warm. Now, the assumption behind developing discrepancy is that the client's going to respond to the gap between where they are and where they want to be by changing their behavior. This requires us, again, the provider, the worker, whatever, whoever we are, to focus on the client's values, their priorities, and their goals, and then to recognize that they're going to maybe be different from us. And it's important for your client to articulate what they value and what will work and what they want to work toward, rather than just echo what we want for them. So again, we are trying to build that discrepancy between where they're at and where they want to be. So once we've kind of learned that concept of how to build discrepancy, again, we've got to go back to supporting their confidence, because ultimately we're not going to be there all the time. We want them to be able to figure this stuff out. And supporting that self-efficacy, again, that's a really critical component of behavior change, because once you're out of the picture, they're left with, well, what do I do now? And if we haven't built in them, a partner in change, if we haven't built in them the skills to keep this change up, well, they're going to keep coming back to us. Essentially, you'll have to be involved in a life forever, to get them to commit to that change. So this kind of goes back to this person-centered approach. Motivational interviewing honors that, and it's a very strength-based way of things. And it requires you, as either the clinician or the practitioner or the worker, or whatever you are, to have hope. Because again, hope and optimism, I've lately done a lot of research in this, and there's a lot of evidence that says that, if you, as the practitioner, have a lot of hope and instill your client with that, they're going to be way more likely to change. Because again, if they don't have hope, they're not optimistic, that goes back to kind of our evocative questions we're asking. Again, they're much less likely to try to do any of these changes. So, if there's no hope that there's going to be something better, they're just not going to do it. And the nice thing to know is that all the research supports this too, is that you have the power to impact that. In the same token, you have the power to impact it negatively. So if you kind of have a bad attitude, or if you're very negative about things, or just discouraging, well, it's going to rub off on that client. Not every one of them, but a good majority. And so it's important. One of the things I always do the very first time I meet with a client is, I talk about that hope to change. I talk about what I think I can give them. I talk about what I think they're capable of doing. And then, at the very end of my first session or first meeting with somebody, I kind of tie it up by talking about my hope of, positive growth and what I see we could accomplish. Doesn't mean we will, but again, that optimism I have that we will accomplish something. And that really, it leaves the mark on your client. It leaves them with that feeling of optimism that, hey, I'm going to accomplish something. So in supporting self-efficacy, again, I already talked about that, but we've got that first thing of we've got to really acknowledge that hope. Because again, if they don't believe there's some hope of change, you're probably not going to be super effective. Or, they'll maybe go to somebody else who has a hope that they could change it. And again, that hope, it's one of the major factors that's going to move our clients forward in whatever they're trying to do. And we've got to remember that hope and motivation are intertwined. They, again, almost synonymous there, because without hope, you're not going to have much motivation, you're not going to be driven, you're not going to have much confidence. So let's move on then. Self-efficacy, it acknowledges the spirit of MI because, again, we are directing versus guiding. I apologize, we're guiding them, not directing them. We're not pushing them to change. We are, again, sharing with them our hope that they can change, and then asking if they want to join us in that. Again, we're being a partner with them. We want to look for that confidence in supporting their self-efficacy. So again, get them to defend their confidence and strengths. The more you do that, it's kind of like a debate. If you get them to prove to you why they have strengths and why they can make changes, they're going to feel a lot better about that. They're going to own it a lot more. And again, we always want to be honest about the importance they place on things. Don't get wrapped up in what you think should be important to them, but really we've got to acknowledge what they think is important. Because again, importance plus confidence is going to equal that readiness, which is going to help us move into, actually giving advice and moving them into that change plan that we want to do. The last thing to remember is asking questions instead of giving orders. We want to be, observing what's happening. Like it says, you stand on top of the canyon and look around, meaning we're going to look and see what all the avenues are that we could go and help the client see that instead of just picking a path and pushing them forward and hoping it works out. So we're going to kind of switch gears into the giving advice because this is getting into our how piece. Now, advice giving, it's a pretty interesting topic because on one hand, if simply giving advice worked, there'd be little need for any of us really, social workers, counselors, lawyers, psychologists. There's plenty of good advice on how to live well, we just don't always follow it. On the other hand, we could all use some good advice from somebody that we admire, and information can help us be more successful and avoid problems. So the question is, how do we effectively give good advice? So I'm going to kind of make some suggestions here. One of the first things that we're doing is we have to ask the question, when do we give advice? So that first thing is we do it with permission. We don't start giving advice if we don't have permission from our client to do that. And that goes back to one of our reflection tools is we're going to ask. We're going to ask about it. So again, prior to giving advice, you got to consider securing that permission. Let me go back here a second. And by doing that, you're going to likely increase your client's desire to listen to what you have to say. They're not going to reject or fight what you're saying. So it may just be, may I give you my perspective on this topic? And again, as soon as they say yes, then you're jointly exploring the idea. Now, in contrast, if you just start giving your perspective without permission, you can't be sure that your client is focused on what you're saying or what your client is willing to listen to. So again, there's better ways to give advice. So you think about it for just a minute. When are you most likely to reject advice? And typically, again, we all have our own little things. First is obviously when we welcome it, when we're ready for it, and when we feel like we have some kind of freedom of choice in there. We're not being forced into something. And that last thing is really key. Is the advice giver an ally or a partner with us? Are we seeing them as somebody who's confrontational, somebody who works against us? But again, you can just think in your own life, who are you more likely to listen to? Now, again, like it says, if we're forcing a change upon our clients, if somebody's not ready, or if we're not giving them any options, it's just not going to work too well. I know for myself, if I don't like advice, it's usually because I don't feel understood, or maybe I think the advice giver is cocky, or they're being controlling or demanding, and usually that makes me resist, even if it's good advice. That resistance is kind of a personal method of saying, I'm in charge of my own life, so bug off. I don't want to listen to what you have to say. So you got to be careful with that. We've got to acknowledge that. So here's, again, just a couple of examples on this. So one way to consider introducing this and moving towards a change plan, so again, kind of that ultimate goal we have here, is the elicit, provide, elicit pattern. Now, you want to try to follow this pattern as closely as you can, and again, just some of the things you have. That first step might be, this is an example, is, we've reviewed a few concerns, and you do a brief summary, emphasize the we, building that partnership, and I'm wondering if we could talk about some changes you'd like to make. So there, you're emphasizing the client's autonomy by asking permission about the changes, and you're giving the client permission to own or invest in that change process. Again, by talking about what it's going to look like. Now, once you do that, you got to listen carefully to what your client says and reflect and follow up on the change talks. So again, you're double-clicking and summarizing. And then, you possibly ask, could I provide you with some ideas on how others in your same position have been successful? Or you could tell them, what do you think your doctor's looking for, or your family's looking for? Again, you're asking permission, and that's critical because it suggests that you respect their autonomy. Also, if they say yes, they're partnering with you and less likely to fight the suggestions you make. So if they say yes, provide a few possible strategies, then elicit more. So elicit which strategy appears the most useful for them by saying something like, which of these ideas seems like it might work for you? A statement like this can help motivate your client and secure their investment in the process, and it'll let you know what will work for that particular client. So again, think about that elicit, go to that provide with permission, and then again, elicit them again. So you're involving them in that change process the whole time. They're getting an option. They're taking part in that. So again, just a quick thing to remember, that permission to give advice. That's one of our reflection skills. But again, it's a great one. It sets things up well for you to give advice to your client. So again, just some things I wrote down there. You might disagree here, but can I give you my opinion? And again, that almost always works. Are you interested in hearing what others have done to be successful? The nice thing I like about that one is it helps your client feel like they're normal, that there's other people that struggle with this problem, that they're not some weirdo and they're the only ones that have this. It kind of normalizes things. That last thing on there, can I give you a different way of looking at this? Again, give them maybe a different perspective or reframing it in a different way that just might help them see things in a different light. So we'll move on now from getting that permission to providing the menu of options. Now, this menu of options, what this is, proposing a menu of options. It's a simple and effective little strategy, and it helps your client feel engaged. They're going to feel respected, and they're going to feel in control, which is the important thing here. Now, allowing them to determine what issues to focus on, it communicates that they're responsible for the change and that they're a partner in the change process. Again, that you're not just bullying them. So like it says, you're going to propose a menu of maybe 2 to 5 things to discuss. And I always try to put some easy things in there and maybe some really hard things. That way, granted, it gives them the opportunity to maybe skirt one of the tough things for a little while, but at the same time, you put it out on the table and you can make sure to attend to it. And again, your client's going to feel like, okay, they're in control of things. Maybe, we don't have to go straight to the really difficult thing. Instead, we can, talk about something easy first. Because if you set the agenda in a way, you're maintaining control over the items discussed. And this really works well, especially when you've got those clients who are talkers that like to just talk and talk and talk. This can be a really good way to try to get them focused on the things you need to accomplish. Again, and I put those easy things out there and then the hard things as well, because then that's going to let them ease into maybe a more difficult discussion. So maybe an example of this is if this happens, consider saying something like, sure, we can discuss whatever it is, but I also like to save time to discuss the harder thing. Again, so you acknowledge the easy thing and maybe you spend a little time on that, but at the same time you make sure that you are getting to that harder topic as well. So again, here's just a little example. We have 3 things to discuss today: progress on your GA forms, how you've used your Horizon card, how you're holding up in general. And you can really, I'd even probably write your agenda out before you talk to your client, and use some of those things those tools we just talked about. Ask for permission. Is it okay if we explore one of these topics? If they are stuck on one, again, do that shift focus tool. We talked about that in our second session, and we just kind of went over it a little bit there. Is again, if they're really stuck on something that's going nowhere, shift the focus to something different. Example I had the other day is I had a client who had a provider give them some really hard advice that they really didn't want to talk about, and it regarded, ultimately that they might have to go back to jail. Some of the things they had done, and they had some very specific things they needed to do to take care of that, but they were going to be really difficult, involved spending some money, involved a lot of time, and they just wanted to complain about how hard things were. That was really my client's agenda. And so I had to, put this menu out there, and I said, okay, one of the easy things, let's talk about how you're hurt by what this provider told you. But then let's also save some time to talk about how you can accomplish what they said and how you can avoid jail. And that really helped me organize the session with this client. We were able to come up with a plan, and that client was able to start on things again. See him next week. Hopefully they actually followed through on that stuff. But again, it made him feel empowered, and at the same time, we didn't skirt around the tough things, those difficult things he needed to talk about. So now, we've also got to discuss how we actually implement these change plans. So now we've got their buy-in by going through, again, their readiness to change, getting them to give us this change talk. We've got their permission. We've even set our menu. So now, again, how do we actually get this going? Now, motivational interviewing's approach, again, is it's going to be very collaborative. We create the plan with them. We're going to be getting input, feedback from your client. We don't want to just do it for them. Again, I know, especially when you're at an agency, sometimes this is kind of difficult to avoid because your agency is going to have very specific guidelines on how you create a plan with somebody that sometimes you've got to follow. But we've got to recognize that, again, our client, it's up to them how they do stuff. At least if we're following this motivational interviewing philosophy. And ultimately, if we really want them to own that change. So this, you can even use this as a little template. This is one that I've used in the past. This is my change plan worksheet, as it says. The first thing is the changes I want to make are, again, you have the client fill that in. Most important reasons for making this change, again, we're going back to those core needs, those core reasons they want to do this. And what steps are you willing to take? So again, what are they willing to do? What are they willing to sacrifice? The ways other people can help me. So now we're looking at their resources. We're talking about how they can engage other people in their life to help them out. And I will know my plan is working if, again, that's going to let them do some self-regulation. They're going to be able to regulate if their plan's working or if it needs to be changed because they're writing down what it's going to look like. So Again, this is a great little worksheet and a really easy way to start working on a change.